gotta laugh at the stupidity, 'cause I've made some real big mistakes, but you make the worst.
Hello and welcome to Close Up with the Hollywood Reporter Directors. I'm Stephen Galloway, and I'd like to welcome Fernando Meirelles.
Thank you.
Martin Scorsese, Noah Baumbach, Lulu Wang, Todd Phillips, and Greta Gerwig. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to start with the business before we get to the film. Several of you have worked in the business for a while. What has changed most significantly for good and bad? Marty, let's start with you.
What has changed, for good or bad? Where would you begin? How could you begin? I mean, basically, well, you could take The Irishman. For 9 years, we couldn't get financing.
That means things have improved financially?
No, I don't know what you want me to.
What I was going to say, I think what you were getting at is three of the filmmakers here made movies for Netflix. It's a huge change. Out of 6 directors here, 3 of the films are on Netflix. That's been a giant change in the business.
It really has. Yeah. And ultimately, the situation in my case in terms of Irishman was something that De Niro and I hadn't made a picture since 1995, Casino. And over the years, we wanted to make another film, and then we never kind of met on certain subject matter. And things changed. Life goes on, and we looked around, and we're still interested in working with each other. Long story. Bottom line is that we get to be 72, 73, 74 years old. And he comes up with this book that Eric Roth gave him, describes the character to me, becomes extremely passionate and somewhat emotional about it. And I said, well, that might be it. And really couldn't get the financing with him and Al and Joe. Could not get the financing. So he went off, did his work. I went off and did some films. And when the time came around, any possibility of them playing younger was out of the question. It was gone. So we looked at each other. So I want to shoot Silence. I had to go and make Silence, And that's when Pablo Hellman mentioned the de-aging, the youthification, which is something we'd heard about, but it was almost like science fiction to us. We did a test of De Niro doing Goodfellas, scene in Goodfellas, and we did him again, and we played it back 2 months later, and we said, let's take the risk, let's try for it. But of course, that comes with a price tag.
Right.
Then it was even more money in terms of the budget, in terms of that. So ultimately, what happened was that we still could not get the picture financed, and I got a call from Rick Yorn, said, are you interested in Netflix? And I said, well, what's the story there? And they explained it. Financially, the film would be complete backing, willing to take the risks with the computer generated imagery, or you call it that, but it's more complicated. And certainly the main thing for me was creative freedom. The trade-off is that it's a streamer. Okay. Yeah. However, I said, but it will be shown in theaters, right? By that point, I've been at this like 47 years or something. So at that point, I've had a few films, I mentioned this the other day, I've had a few films play 1 or 2 weeks in the theater and taken out.
Right. Yeah.
Including, especially King of Comedy.
Right. Yeah.
It lasted a week and a half, they took it out.
Exactly. True.
Never shown again,
Amazing.
Yeah, see, this film, The Two Popes, we're in like 35 festivals. Then we're going to have like 2-3 weeks of theater, and then the platform. I mean, can't be better. I mean, we're having all the
and it stays in theaters.
Yeah.
The question is that we're in the more than an evolution. We're in a revolution of communication and cinema, really, or movies or film, whatever you want to call it. And now there are all these venues. Yeah.
And because the audience for Netflix, for instance, is much bigger than theatrical audience, they can take risks.
It's a different but doesn't that change actually how you shoot a film if you know it's going to be seen on a TV screen instead of a...
I doubt it.
No, not at all.
An answer, but
I mean, for me, it didn't. No, I approach it exactly the same way, and Netflix also has made adjustments. I mean, even as recently as 2 years ago, there was no exclusive theatrical run. They would do theatrical, but it was always day and date.
I see.
And now, they've adjusted. I've never had a movie released wide immediately. It's always been a rollout. New York, LA. And then it moves out to the thing, and then you break wider, and often that's where there are bigger challenges, because suddenly you're competing for theaters with giant blockbusters, no matter how well your movie may be doing sort of in cities, and And so in a sense, I feel like Netflix almost reflects the traditional independent cinema model now, which is you get to play exclusively in theaters, you roll out, you can kind of, have, and then the wide break is Netflix, which in a sense is a more democratic break for these movies than...
Can I just say, because I have a slightly different perspective on the streaming versus, independent studios, not even the big studios. I'll just say, to be totally honest, I would not be at this table if it wasn't for our small independent studio, because we got an offer at Sundance from A24 and also got a much larger double offer from a large streaming platform. And the financiers and producers, of course, were like, are you crazy? We have to take this bigger deal. And I said, no, it's not about the money. One thing we sometimes don't talk about with some of these bigger streaming platforms is that, it's a different business model. It's not necessarily about making money back. It's about brand. They're building their brand. And when you're an established filmmaker, you are a brand that they want to partner with to help build their own brand. But with newer filmmakers, newer voices, you don't have a brand. You need to build that brand. And I know now, because our film has been in the theaters for 4 months, for a film that's 75, 80% in Mandarin subtitled, but is an American film, to even first of all get that finance, but then to have that play as an American film, 100% Asian American cast, to be seen as an American story, and play in theaters for 4 months, and then for me to be at this table, I know for a fact that if I took that bigger, the bigger money, that they wouldn't have the energy to put behind someone like me to build my brand when they have so many esteemed established directors that are also part of the conversation.
I think the negative to it is a filmmaker like Lulu would get lost on Netflix. Or
true, because you wouldn't know where to find it.
That's right.
Things.
But you're not going to. These guys aren't.
No, but the thing is,
on Netflix,
what's
right, and that's what they're saying. Their pitch was, we have a huge global platform, like we have millions of eyeballs. But if you look at the music business and you say to a small independent musician, you can put your music on iTunes. Anybody can upload their music to iTunes or maybe even Spotify these days. It doesn't really matter, because if people don't know how to find you, it doesn't matter how wide it is.
And there are different business models within the streaming services too. It's not, they have different ways that they treat different movies.
One of the things I was thinking, I never thought of it in terms of, and this is going to sound strange, I never thought of it in terms of money. For me, it was desperation.
What, $160 million?
Doesn't matter. It's desperation. It had to be done.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm not saying we're relegated. And Netflix did a great job.
Would you have done it if it didn't have a theatrical release guaranteed?
Maybe.
Wow.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. It had to be done because it had to be. It was from here, and we're too old now.
As you know, Marty said that a lot of the films we make today are theme park rides.
Marty, what did you do?
What did he say first?
He
So
said,
we all understand.
I want to be precise that a lot of the Marvel films are theme park rides.
I said superhero films.
Superhero films.
I don't even know Marvel. I remember it was a comic book.
You've never been asked to direct a Marvel film?
Huh?
You've never been asked to direct a Marvel film?
No.
Who has
Never
been
came
asked
to me.
direct a Marvel film? You have? You?
I don't know if I'm supposed to say that.
You agree that superhero films are essentially theme park rides?
I mean, maybe, sure, but I like theme park rides.
Yeah, I could explain a little about what that
Sure.
is. When you state it like that, it's like
thing. I was
it becomes a big
India.
no,
Yeah, I was asking in India about that.
Yeah,
In
India, I know.
Because they quote you in the audience and they asked me, what do I think about Marvel?
It's the new thing. We all get asked about it now.
No, because
What you think.
I remember, when Disneyland was built. I'm that ancient, and one of the aspirations of the studios was to become as important, in a sense, to American culture as Disneyland. And I think the first studio to really do that was Universal Tours. And then you add the blockbuster on top of that, and why not? The sense of theme park has always been there. It's not bad. We used to love to go to amusement parks, but now in an amusement park you have the film.
The Kundun ride is amazing.
The Kundun ride is, yes, thank you. It's almost as good as the Bringing Out the Dead ride.
Yes, yeah.
I'm sorry, you
No,
want to ask me
I
a
agree
question?
with you because I don't think that theme parks are, and I don't think that's what you were saying, that it's negative. I think you're making the distinction between cinema, the bigger entertainment things, which is really made by committee, and that's one of the reasons I don't want to do it right now.
Don't do it.
Because I haven't figured out my voice yet as a filmmaker.
Right.
And I agree that we have to talk about cinema, not in a pretentious way, but when I was on set, sometimes there were some people who were like, "Oh, the girls want to make cinema." And there was like this
No,
kind
but
of
that's
eye roll.
always been the case. That's all.
Is that?
Really? Yeah, that's always
Oh.
been like, stop with this art business.
Yeah.
We used to get, and I said, who said that? And I hear it on this set. What am I doing? We're making a movie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You said these are not cinema. Greta, what is cinema to
Oh,
you?
Jesus.
Quiet, Greta, come on.
I mean, really, I
Sit
said,
there
look at this
quietly.
table. Why me? God, I don't know. I mean, I know it when I see it. I say that. I mean, I know it when
great.
I see it. I know when you sit in a movie theater, and I've had the privilege of being on a film festival jury, which is in some ways the really pure way to watch movies because you have nothing. You have no context for what the thing it is you're seeing, and you don't miss it. From the first shot, you know when there's an author there, and you know when it's personal, and you can feel it. You can feel it come through
that's what has to be
every
protected.
moment, every shot, and the actors and every piece of it, and it just doesn't miss you. And I don't know that I can explain it better than that, but you just know it when you see it. And sometimes, for whatever reason, a stretch will go by, and I don't see something that hits me like that, and then I'll go to the movie theater and I'll see something and it makes you fall in love with the form again.
yeah.
I don't know.
I love like when you catch, we've talked about this,
Yeah.
like you catch something on, you just turn the
On
TV
yeah,
on and
amazing.
you're in the middle of a movie and you
Yeah.
know immediately there's a personality and a voice behind it. That's.
There was a feeling in the 70s that every film you saw could change your life.
That's right.
Todd, is that still true today?
I mean, I think it is, but if I go back to the what Marty said about cinema, and because I think really he got a lot of heat for it, but I understand fully what you were saying. When we were struggling to get Joker made, which sounds funny because it exists in the superhero world, but it's really not one of those movies. In fact, it was greatly inspired by the works of Martin Scorsese and Sidney Lumet and other filmmakers that I sort of grew up worshiping in the 70s and early 80s and their movies. But we had a really hard time getting that film made, which seems insane today, now seeing how well the movie's done. We spent a year at Warner Brothers, and I saw emails back and forth, literally where they said, does he realize, meaning me, does he realize we sell Joker pajamas at Target? And so
Is that true?
It's very
Yeah.
what you're saying. Where doesn't the movies come first, the pajamas come second? Like, are the
Yeah.
pajamas dictating the
No,
movies?
no.
You can't make your decisions based on that. And that was my argument, of course, was we're really going to dictate, movies based on pajamas. but it exists, this idea.
But you know those pajamas when you see them.
Yeah,
they have
know
a-
it.
yeah.
How do you
Yeah.
navigate that system? How
Well,
do you deal
I
with
mean-
Warner Bros? Do you get one person to be your ally?
Yeah,
Or
you do.
Who?
And one by one. I mean, the problem at Warner's for me was the regimes change so often.
Oh, God, yes.
At a lot of
Yeah.
studios,
Yeah,
you've
that
been at
happened,
studios,
yeah.
and so you finally get everybody on board, and all of a sudden they're gone, and now you're starting over. And when you start over with, sometimes people don't like to inherit other stuff from
Definitely
other people,
not.
right? So you're
King of Comedy was
you're-
a good example.
Was it?
Yeah, yeah.
So you're overcoming that, but I mean, this film in particular, luckily we had the head of marketing who didn't change, Blair Rich, who really championed it from the script and got what we were trying to do, got that it was sort of an anti-comic book movie, so to speak, that it was a character study, a deep dive, and really a movie, that explored mental illness, that explored compassion, that explored all these sort of things we wanted to do under the guise of a comic book film. And in fairness to Warner's, I mean, when you see the movie, you've seen it. It's a bold swing for a studio to take.
What did they ask you to change?
They didn't have to change anything. I mean, that wasn't part of the conversation. It was just about yes or no. And DC Comics was involved because they own the character. They didn't ask us to change one thing. Once they came on board, it was a thing. But it was literally a year from a finished script to a green light.
Were you worried before the film came out that there might be some violence?
No, because I just didn't subscribe to that, quite frankly, bullshit thing that was happening in the media where they just pick a movie every so often and declare it means something that it doesn't. I mean, we had think pieces being written about this movie where people proudly wrote, I haven't seen the movie, I don't need to see the movie, I'm not going to see the movie, and then they would write 2 pages about why the movie's bad. I mean, I don't think there's been more...
Can I tell you, a studio chief said to me, I'm not going to see that movie. I said, you're a studio chief.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't say who, but...
I'll find out. But yeah.
Marty, you go ahead and produce this film. Your partner, Emma, is the producer on it. Why did you decide not to produce?
Personal reasons, I think, for me, also scheduling. And quite honestly, Taxi Driver and King of Comedy and Last Temptation of Christ.
In other words,
My time, those were my fights.
Yes, that's
Taxi
what I
Driver
wanted.
wasn't a fight. We did it, and then there were some consequences to be paid at this point in time. Then we went ahead and did King of Comedy, and we were attacked for that. And the film was considered the flop of the year, the new show Entertainment Tonight. On New Year's Eve, I was putting my tie on, and I'd look over in this TV and it said, now the flop of the year, and a curtain opened. It was King of Comedy. And everything had turned, all of Hollywood had turned against that kind of filmmaking, really. For other reasons, too.
Do you think in a funny way, because I think we all romanticize sort of, the sort of, the 70s and even early 80s, perhaps. In a funny way, do you think King of Comedy would have done better 15 years later with independent
Probably.
studios, because they wouldn't, it would have been like A24, these companies would have known what to do with it.
Exactly. However, 1978, 79 Apocalypse Now, right? At UA. Then Raging Bull, 1980. 10 days later, Heaven's Gate opens up. It was the end. Wow. I'm not saying Heaven's Gate's a bad film. I'm just saying they finished it off. They had enough of these crazed auteurs. And everybody, including the critical community, particularly the New York Times. One review, the film closed. One night. Wow. So that was the end of it all. And then you had other films that were being made that were, wonderful sci-fi, fantasy things, and people wanted to see those. We go ahead and make King of Comedy. We just made Raging Bull, so when people went to see it, they expected De Niro as Jake LaMotta again.
Right.
And that changed things, you see.
Yeah.
And at that point, also the studio had changed.
Right.
So they said,
It's
we're not
always
doing
hard,
it.
yeah.
Gone, picture, finished.
Right.
So I went and I tried to do Last Temptation of Christ. It was 1983. I spent the whole year here. And 6 weeks before shooting started, it was canceled. At which point I said, I think I should leave.
So when you said, you had death threats when you did Last Temptation.
Yes. I went through it all. I can't go.
When you say you don't go through the fight, did you mean you didn't want to go through that again with Joker? Or you didn't want to go
it's
through
an
the fight
issue.
with the studio?
It's a personal issue about the kind of picture I want to make at this point in my life. I'm more comfortable with this picture, Irishman. I'm more comfortable there. If I can help a younger filmmaker get something going. But Todd knows he's done the Hangover things, and we were talking about this for quite a while. So,
But Fernando, you live outside the Hollywood system.
Yeah. And I don't depend on it, so it's great for me. I'm in a
So
very good
how are
situation
those-
here. It's true. I'm in a very good position here.
If you're an international filmmaker, are you in an easier position or is it tougher? Has that world changed too?
For me, it's been easier. I mean, because I don't have the involvement. I don't have to make people like me, So I can be very. And I'm finding very good producer that supports what I want to do. So I'm being very independent in whatever I want to do, and without having to please people around, because I don't depend on the. Do you get this?
Yes.
I'm really There's a very good thing about being an outsider and wanting to be an outsider.
Did you ever think of moving to America?
No, I have very, very deep roots in Brazil, family, and I like to direct in Portuguese. What I'm doing the last years, when I went to direct in Portuguese, I'm doing TV series, and because it's different. I mean, I understand English, but I don't feel English. When you, like if you say mango tree, in English it's just a tree. In Portuguese, mangueira. This is my mother.
I feel it more
So
too.
much, so I have to direct in Portuguese sometimes.
Yeah.
That's the.
What was the toughest thing about making Two Popes?
I think when I read the script, I loved the dialogues, and I said yes. And then I realized that the film was two men talking about religion. Quite exciting, isn't it? Just
It is very exciting.
and how to make it cinematic. So that was the big challenge.
How big was the bankability of your actors a factor in making the film? Were you at all like...
No, I was completely free to cast. And to be honest, how I cast Jonathan Pryce, I Googled when I signed the film, I looked for pictures of the Pope just to see how he felt. And there was a lot of pictures of him next to Price because they look alike. So it was the obvious choice. So what I did, I said, well, this guy, I mean, he's a good actor.
Jonathan
And I
Pryce is
checked
great.
his work.
Yeah, you're lucky it was
he's
Jonathan
great.
Pryce.
He's amazing.
And then I watched an interview with him, just him being himself.
Yeah.
He's great.
And I felt he's so humble and funny, and I said he has the same kind of energy from the Pope.
He's so
Maybe this guy
simple.
look alike and has the same. Let's go for him. And I mean,
Did you ever
watchable.
meet either of those popes?
You know, well, I shook hands with Pope Francis, and I told him, I'm making a film on you. He couldn't care less. He said, really? Yeah, good. He just, he really.
You had a screening of Silence at the Vatican. didn't
Yes, but he
you?
was not at that screen. He saw it later. Yeah, yeah, and
He
you know,
streamed it.
He's starting to die.
To what extent is art autobiographical? Noah?
Philip Roth has a great quote about it, that he always started by taking two stones of reality and rubbing them together to spark the imagination. And I find, I mean, I respond to that because I often, you know, I like shooting in New York. I like to shoot on streets that I have memories from childhood, you know, things. And it, again, doesn't have to have any resonance with the specifics of the movie, but it puts me in a place of creativity. You know, I feel like so much of what we do is a kind of conversation with the child we were, you know, and it's that place of play. You know, I try to use all of these things, and I put then familiar people in the movies, you know, friends, my doorman, our doorman. You know, yeah, because I mean, like you know, when your mom is
my
in the
mother, my father,
yeah,
my
no,
friends,
and whether you know it or not, it's you connect to something personal, because I think you can feel it even if you don't know it. But it makes me, I mean, it goes to what we were talking about, how we like our sets. I mean, I like to feel kind of at home and as relaxed and calm at home on a set, and I feel like then chaos can can come from that.
How much does autobiography come into your films? One of them seems to be very autobiographical, and now you've made Little Women, which seems not to be. Is that true?
Well, I think for me, for Little Women, that book meant so much to me, and it was a book that I don't ever remember not knowing who the March sisters were. I always knew who Jo March was. I always knew those sisters and that mother and those adventures, and they so became part of the inner landscape of myself. They felt like my memories. So in a lot of ways, it didn't feel that different to me. The book had become part of me. And I think another reason why the Little Women feel so personal to me is because of the very existence of Louisa May Alcott, who wrote Little Women, who kind of doubled herself in the character of Jo. And the distance between what was real and what was false is emotional to me. Things like, you know, she did have 4 sisters, and they did struggle. However, in the book, the March family are the genteel poor, and in life, the Alcotts were wretchedly poor. Louisa was working by the time she was 14. She was out sewing all day, and she wrote stories at night that she sold for almost nothing. And she taught herself to write with both hands, because when she got home, she could only write so long with her right hand, and it would bleed and cramp. That's not cute. That's serious. And I think I think there was something that I inherently responded to about that distance. And then what I kind of did with my film in terms of starting when they're adults, and then childhood becomes a thing that you go back to because it was the last time everyone was together, and that you were happy in this way, and you felt like anything was possible, and adults have more limited options. And I felt like if I could somehow address that reflexivity in the narrative of my film, it both mirrors what I go through, because you're always making something that's away from you but part of you. And then, you know, the scene of her trying to sell a story, I took that almost verbatim from the book, because I know exactly what that is to sit in front of somebody and try to sell them a story. And they're telling me I need to make changes, and I'm figuring out how many changes I can make and still live with myself, but I need the money. That's something I understand, and also these characters are so close to me. So, I don't know, I sort of felt like I needed a chart to explain that, but I think I got it across.
Do you feel that Hollywood is improving in its portrayal of women? I mean, for so long, there was a sense from the studios that there had to be, we're making films for a male audience. Is that changing?
Well, changing what's Hollywood, right? Like
exactly, it's changing.
It's different filmmakers. I think if you have women tell our own stories, then it's changing because it's our perspective, the way, and we were talking about this, that when people always ask, what does it feel like to be a female director? And it's like, I've never been anything else in my life. I can't compare the two. I can't be so it's just a different perspective.
Well, I also think that I'm just wholesale stealing this from Meryl Streep because she's very smart and she said this to me. I think it's hard to make a diagnosis in a way because, when you think about the movies and the female characters and the actresses in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, and you think about Carole Lombard and Rosalind Russell and the kind of things that they could do in films, they're great characters. They didn't invent them yesterday. But Meryl said this. She said, well, Rosalind Russell can come in and yell at anyone and give him what for because there's no actual chance she's going to take his job. In this day and age, there's an actual chance that you'll take their job. So it becomes less inviting to have a woman come in and give you what for if she's going to take your job. And I was like, well, you're just smarter than everyone, Meryl Streep. That's just...
Can I say, for years I was, I did a documentary on American cinema 20 years ago, whatever, and I did a whole segment, 12 to 15 minutes on Ida Lupino.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a woman who,
Just watch The Hitchhiker.
The Hitchhiker is incredible. And bigamist and not wanted. And so my thing was that I wish sometimes to take credits off a picture. I looked at Archipelago, Joanna Hogg's film. I had no idea it was directed by a woman.
Her movies are great.
Yeah, I just fell in love with it. I didn't know. And then we connected or whatever, I wound up working. And also the world has changed. It's post-World War II for a long, long time now. So everything changed. And the trauma of the 60s and 70s is the generations that even remembered those films in the theater are gone. So this is the new world.
Is it different in Brazil? By the way, you're dealing with a pretty reactionary political system. How does that impact your work as a filmmaker?
Well, my work, I'm being able to do my work, but for the Brazilian cinema is a very tough moment. He's really deconstructing everything that we built in the last 15 years. Brazilian cinema, in the 90s, before I shot City of God, we were producing 9 films a year. Last year there was 150. So the industry really boomed, and TV industry already also boomed. But now he's really blocking all the, it's been a difficult moment.
What do you most like about the filmmaking process, and what do you most dislike?
I love editing.
You do?
Yeah, actually, I think I go to the set. Well, I like set as well, but mostly to grab things, so I can go to the cutting room, quiet, dark, and experiment.
We always say making the movie, it's the price you pay to get to the editing room.
I'm with you. I'm with you. And then you change the whole script. You change the acting. You change everything.
The thing is, if you ask,
that's when you start the film.
If you ask but I think it's because directors, by their nature, are control freaks. It's what kind of leads us to this, and there's nowhere you have more control than in the editing room. There's always these variables. It makes it fun. Being on set is fun. Casting a movie is fun. But it's a little out of control. You get to an editing room and you finally control it.
That's the fun, though, trying to get control out of control.
Yes.
That's the thing. That's the tension, is riding those horses,
It's true.
And that's the great part.
But for those who like you, as an actress, do you feel the same way?
It's interesting to me. I was thinking when you all were talking how many... First of all, this is a tangent, but it's so interesting to me to watch people who make films about faith, and in some ways I feel like everyone here has made a film about faith, and I'm interested in that. Anyway, that's just and sometimes it's directly about faith, like Silence is directly about faith, But I do think it's, I think we're always trying to figure that out. Anyway, that's another. I'll think that thought later. But
what would Meryl say about it?
I know. I'm gonna ask Meryl, and then I'll tell you. Well, for me, I like set, and I like being on set. I mean, I feel very deeply that movies are made in prep. By the time you're on set, it's too late. It's happening. I feel quite vividly that every second you spend doing one thing is a second you don't spend doing something else. Now, that's true for your entire life, but I feel it most vividly on a film set. And kind of always is asking, is it good enough? You never feel like you got it, but maybe it's going to be good enough. And I don't know, whatever the negotiation of time and art is, it's absurd to have a timed art form.
Exactly.
But it's
Yeah.
also
this
beautiful
feeling.
to have a timed art form because we're all on a
Yeah,
timer.
exactly. Yeah.
I mean, in the big timer.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, yes, yes.